Everything you're saying. Isn't that crazy? They'll be able to hear everything. Oh, exciting. All right, there it goes. Now it's recording. All right, so that's the wrong one.
I have a question. Why
Yes.
is it recording? What's the purpose of that?
Because we have half the class missing, and when that's the case, I'll usually record what's going on. When you're what? When you're missing. So anytime Caitlin Root is missing from now on, I will have to record.
Yeah.
Yes. Okay, she's going to plan on missing a lot more frequently now. So, yeah, just be aware.
Every day.
All right, so we were talking about Prussia, right? And so, who can tell me, who was the first of the Prussian absolutists to establish Brandenburg Prussia as a second-rate power? Frederick Wilhelm the Great Elector. There you go. So Friedrich Wilhelm the Great Elector is going to be the first to establish Prussian absolutism because he's using his army. And so which war is going to establish Prussia as a second-rate power?
30 Years' War.
The third, yes, okay, good. So sorry, I got focused for a second. 30 Years' War, indeed. So the 30 Years' War and the Treaty of Westphalia are going to put them on the map, so to speak. Now remember, Prussia, disjointed country, and they're in a tough neighborhood. And so what are they going to need if they want to rock and roll? If they want to be a big power? They want to protect themselves. Army, big time. All right, so they're going to build up the army. Who's going to come next in the Prussian dynasty? Frederick the Third. Frederick the Third. So Frederick the Third will be an elector, but the Austrian Emperor Charles VI is going to say, yeah, all right, Prussia, I will make you king in Prussia. And so thus he becomes what number? Frederick the First. Okay, and so Frederick the First, how is he different from his son? By the way, who was the son? Friedrich Wilhelm the First. All right, so Friedrich Wilhelm the First is different from his papa. They are polar opposites, right? And so, how so?
Frederick the First wanted to be more like Louis the
Yes. So he wants to party, be Baroque, and be Versailles, right, in Berlin. All right, so he is Mr. Baroque, and so his son doesn't like it. Why? Give me some nicknames for Frederick William the First.
Spartan King.
Spartan King, indeed.
The
Royal Drill Sergeant. What else? The Soldier King and the Potsdam Führer, right? So a reference to the historiography there. All right, good. So Frederick William I, tell me some of his eccentricities. What do you got?
Like ballets and stuff.
No, he hates ballets, right?
Oh.
That. He likes rock salt. Yes, so he'll carry around pistols full of rock salt, so when his servant does something wrong, he'll shoot you. Yes, it doesn't kill you. It doesn't kill you, it just really hurts. All right, so typically he'd shoot you in the hind as you're running away, because he figured, it'll hurt, but it won't be that bad. All right, and then his cane. What do you do with his cane all the time?
Beat people.
Beat people publicly. Even diplomats he would beat publicly, which is a huge breach of conduct. What about tall soldiers? How's he feel about them?
Loves them.
Loves them! And so how's he going to feel about Peter the Great? Loves him! And wants to make him a general in his army. That didn't work. Okay,
And
all
then the
right.
guy with the monkey.
And then he what?
The guy with the monkey.
Yes, Jacob Paul Gundling. So he's anti-intellectual. So anytime Jacob Paul Gundling is around, what do they do to the poor guy?
Make fun of him.
Make fun of
And
him
dress
big
a
time.
monkey up
Dress a
like him.
monkey up like him, right? They dress him in Baroque style. They get him copiously drunk, which is no problem because Jacob Paul Gundling actually enjoyed it. Gives him a laxative on his wedding night. Those are funny things. Funny things.
Why did we say
I have no idea. All right. I mean, I think at first he was kind of put off by it, but Gundling eventually was just like, whatever. And then, because he stayed drunk basically every waking hour of the day. Okay? So, I mean, at some point you got to wonder if he was just doing it for the booze and the camaraderie. Because when he was sitting in his office before, he was like, oh, I'm an intellectual, no one likes me. And now it's like, hey, they like me because they want to make fun of me. Yay. Yes. It is sad. I mean, you see this in social relationships a lot of the time, sometimes in high school too.
They're all in
Sometimes in high school too. You've got this kid that everybody makes fun of, and he's like, yeah, they like me, You see it. It's sad. It's really sad. But, yeah. So he went along with it. All right. So that brings us to his son, Frederick II the Great. How is Frederick II the Great? Way different from his father. We talked about it yesterday. How's he way different? Polar opposite. What? He likes the flute. Exactly. He plays the flute. He writes orchestral music. What else does he do? May or may not be gay. I'm banking on that he is gay. He did get married at his father's request. Did have children to pass the dynasty, but probably was gay. All right, and then he's also a big fan of the Enlightenment, big fan of intellectualism, big fan of Baroque culture and music, big fan of France's cultural system, right? And so, I mean, very different from his father in that sense. And so, because of that, as a teenager, is he going to have a good time with his dad here? No. All right, Frederick William I kept publicly humiliating his son, making him lick his boots in public, beating him publicly, beating him in front of diplomats. I mean, it doesn't look good. And so the kid's going to try and run away. They're going to have a falling out. The son will be almost killed, right? Almost be put to death for it. But finally, it all comes together. And by the time he assumes the throne in 1740, what kind of monarch do we have on our hands? All right, just an absolute? An enlightened despot. An enlightened despot. What is an enlightened despot? I mean, this guy is the enlightened despot. Because remember, Joseph II tried to be enlightened and a despot, but he was far more enlightened and much less despotic, right? It didn't go real well for Joseph II. He didn't maintain allegiance from below, but he had all the authority above. Does that make sense? Yeah. Didn't maintain the allegiance of the people. How's Frederick II different?
He loves the people.
Okay. Loves the people, treats them pretty well, gives them the enlightenment, and yet, is he still really good at war?
Yes.
Is he still really good at maintaining order and authority in his kingship?
Yes.
Absolutely. All right, so I think if you look at this picture right here down below, this is the perfect representation of the king. So this is actually a combination of two different paintings that were done of him at the time. One is him right here, charging into battle. Frederick wore a uniform every day as well, just like his father, but he could also wear the Baroque clothes that you see here as he's performing a flute performance that he himself wrote with a Baroque chamber band, right? So that's pretty cool. But also, he's the last monarch in European history to lead his troops into battle on the front lines. Like, he would be the front guy charging on foot with a sword and a flag in the other hand, right? That's pretty cool. And never died. I mean, he's a pretty cool guy.
Wait, in war, isn't it like against the rules to like kill the monarch?
Yes, so that's why he kind of got away with it. Rules start to change by the time we get into this time period. That's what, I mean, a lot of generals did start dying, and that's why no other monarchs did it after him. But he's pretty dang brave. I mean, nonetheless, I mean, guys could still get killed in battle, no matter what. And so he's pretty dang brave to do this. But Frederick the Great, he's going to be called the Great for a number of reasons. I mean, he's a Renaissance man. He's a big believer in the Enlightenment, loves the intellectualism of the Enlightenment, and he wants to be the ruler of Europe that uses reason and still maintains his authority. So he's going to write a book, and that book is called Anti-Machiavelli. Anti-Machiavelli. Tell me, what did Machiavelli talk about? Review. First of all, what books did he write? Machiavelli, first book, most well-known, The Prince. What's his second most well-known? And the one where he's actually being honest with us and telling us what he really wants to see, which is Republican State. What was that one called? Discourses! Alright, so Machiavelli, I mean, the way that everyone remembers him is as the prince, that monarch that will do anything for the state, subvert anyone else for the state, will do anything to preserve the state, even if it means killing off people and being a despot, right? So he's writing a book called Anti-Machiavelli, going against those ideas. So essentially what he tells us is that a prince must be a prince that sees all, meaning that he's constantly paying attention to the documents, constantly paying attention to what's going on in his realm, constantly maintaining the economy and the army. But what else does he have to do? Right, treat people the way that they deserve to be treated. So if we have laws that are antiquated, that are, say, hundreds of years old, and make it so that the Junkers have all the power and the peasants have nothing, is that good for your system? No. If we have serfdom, is that good for our system? No, so he's going to change these things, update the law books, make it much more usable for the people, make it so that the people actually have, you know, at least the ability to live their lives in peace. And so he's going to do that by changing the system, and we'll see how as we go along. So he's called an enlightened despot for that reason. Many people believe so. He considered himself the premier domestique. You notice what language he's using here? French! Français! Again, is he weird compared to his dad? I mean, his dad was all about German, right? And absolutely loathed French. But here, this monarch preferred to speak in French in all of his undertakings. Really didn't like the German language, which is too bad. I love German, but it is a lot uglier compared to French, right? It sounds angry all the time. Like, das ist ein Hundewetter. That sounds angry. All I did was tell you it's, you know, bad weather outside. Okay, so the premier domestique, though, this guy wants to consider himself as, like, the first domestic servant of the state. Now, wait a second, he's a king, isn't he? He's an absolute monarch, but he considers himself a what? The first servant of the state, the first domestic of the state. So the first guy that's serving the state. So he wants to be involved in the state to preserve it, but he wants to do so with enlightenment and philosophy and reason. All right, so he provided religious toleration. Why is that a big deal for Europe at this time? Yeah, all right, most countries did not want to do that. Austria will try it. How will it go for them under Joseph II? Keep in mind, Joseph II comes after Frederick II, right? So he's going to try it based on Frederick's principles, and it's not going to go well at all. All right, and then what about the Netherlands? They're the only other country to have religious toleration, aren't they? And so now Prussia, this very militaristic state, is going to say, hey, we're going to do that too. So that's pretty cool. What he said was that if we have an efficient government, it's not only better for the king, but better for who else? The people, right? So if we have a happy king, what else can we have? Happy people. But the big difference between Frederick and other quote-unquote enlightened despots of the era is that, yeah, he's trying to get that happy king, happy people, but he's not going so far to please the people that he loses his authority. Does that make sense? Always first and foremost, what's he got to have? Authority, right? He's got to have his authority. Otherwise, nothing's going to work. So if he's got his authority, maintains his authority, he'll try to make the people happy too. Does that make sense? All right, very good. Now let's take a look at his wars, because Frederick the Great isn't called Frederick the Great just because he was an awesome enlightened monarch. Why else do they call him Frederick the Great? He was good at war, yeah. All right, so very good at war. You notice Prussia here is disjointed again. Here we've got East Prussia. That's where we have Königsberg. Here we have Brandenburg, Prussia, which is where we have Berlin and all that fun stuff, and then all these other little disjointed territories. So Frederick wants to try and unite his empire. Now in 1740, he comes to the throne. Who else comes to the throne in 1740? It's a lady. Maria Theresa, indeed. So Maria Theresa comes to the throne right here, and she's got a chunk of territory known as Silesia. And what does Frederick want? Silesia, indeed. He wants that chunk of territory. It's right there on his southern border. I'm going to take it. Why? Why can I totally take it from Frederick? Because I can. Because I'm awesome and I'm a man. And what is? Yeah. Okay. So sorry, Maria Theresa. Sorry, women's history. But what is she? A woman. All right. And so remember, what established her to the throne in the first place? The Pragmatic Sanction. All right, so all of Europe said, sure, yeah, we'll listen to you, King Emperor Charles VI. We totally agree with this Pragmatic Sanction. Why not? Did they really? No! So as soon as Frederick goes to war with Austria, who else is going to want to go to war with Austria? Everybody! Hey! Everybody's saying, whoa, Austria's weak sauce right now. Let's get in on that. So Bavaria, this principality, is going to invade, trying to take over parts of Bohemia and Moravia. They're not going to be all that successful, but they're trying, right? And their ally, Prussia, is going to move in on Silesia and take that chunk of territory. Then France, they're like, hey, the Austrian Netherlands are weak right now, or excuse me, the Austrian Habsburgs are weak right now, so we're going to invade these two chunks of territory. What are these? The Austrian Netherlands, right? So there's the Dutch Republic. Here's the Austrian Netherlands. They're going to invade those territories because they want them for themselves. And then meanwhile, Great Britain, they're like, whoa, guys, balance of power. Hello. You can't take over Austria. So what's Britain going to do? They're going to get involved as well and help Austria because Britain's always concerned about that issue of the balance of power, right? So here's the text for all of that we just explained. Silesia is what Frederick wants. He wants that territory because it's got a lot of good resources. And what does Prussia need if they want to survive? Resources. They need trees, they need wool, they need, land to produce food. They need everything that that Silesia's got to offer. So, and it's actually got a little bit of quote-unquote industry at this time where they're starting to make, not quite a factory, but, pretty darn close to it. Cottage industry is what it's called. So they're starting to build things up. And so the Habsburgs are weak because they got a woman on the throne. Sorry, ladies. And so Frederick is going to move in and take it over. All right, now, Frederick is going to be successful, highly successful in the first year of war. I mean, so successful that the Austrian army was just like, whoa, we're getting the heck out of here, and left Silesia wide open. So he took it over. Now think about it. Now you look at the dates here, 1740 to 48. He's got allies, right? Usually when you go to war with your allies, is it good for you to leave the war as soon as you get what you want? No, that's bad form, isn't it? You all fight until the bloody end, and then you all get what you want, hopefully. Well, Frederick II said, well, you know what? I got Silesia. I'm done. So he quit in 1741. Meanwhile, the rest of his allies, what are they having to do still?
Fighting.
Just stop fighting. All right, so, is that a little Machiavellian? He says, hey, I got what I want. I'm done. A little bit Machiavellian. But wait a second. What book did you write? Anti-Machiavelli. He is perhaps the most Machiavellian ruler we have. Interesting. All right, we'll see more examples later. All right, but then he's like, well, wait a second. Austria's still weak. So in 1745, he says, oh, why the heck not? I'll rejoin the war and get more spoils. Oh, and it will work. He will get lots of good things out of this thing. The biggest one being Silesia. The other thing is now Prussia is definitely being recognized as a strong power that people don't want to mess with. All right, and so at this point, he's going to get what he wants. He's going to get the status and the spoils. Right? And so the treaty that's going to end this thing. This is going to be the trivia question of the day. Anyone know what the name of that treaty is? Give you a hint? It's on the boards. It's the Treaty of Aix-la-Chapelle. Yeah, there you go. Aix-la-Chapelle. Treaty of. Yeah. Yeah? Okay. Now, over in the New World, they were also fighting this war. You guys remember? I think it was called Queen Anne's War or something like that over in the New World. So the American colonists were fighting in this thing, and the British colonists were fighting in this thing against the dirty French. So what are we noticing about wars in Europe at this point? What's starting to happen? It's spreading. It's not just on the European continent. It's going to be everywhere where Europe has some control. Then we've got this issue. This is going to lead us into the 7 Years' War. Sorry, the map's a little hard to see here. Obviously, Italy did not just disappear into the waters there, but yeah. So here you go. Here's the New World possessions. And then you got India, sort of. You can kind of see it maybe. And then you've got Europe over here. Okay, so you notice there is Frederick. He's going to be the yellow territories. But what happened to his former allies? Right, his former allies right here. They went to Maria Theresa's side. And then all of a sudden, Frederick used to be fighting against Great Britain in the previous war, just a decade earlier. Now what are they doing? They're joining with Prussia, right? They're buddies. Okay, so this thing is going to be called the 7 Years' War. So, Maria Theresa sitting down here in Austria-Hungary is ticked. Justifiably. She just lost a bitter war. She's been working feverishly for the last 10 years to build up her army and to try and get reestablished as a primary power in Europe. And so what she's going to do is stage what we call a diplomatic revolution. So the diplomatic revolution, what this means is that she's going to go and talk to Prussia's former allies, people like Bavaria, people like France, and then she's going to tell them, in Spain as well, she's going to talk to the Spanish, and say, hey guys, you know what? You know who really stinks? Prussia. You know who I hate? Prussia. You know who you should hate? Who? Prussia! That's right. Why should we hate Prussia?
Because they backed out the war.
Yeah, so these guys are feeling stabbed in the back in France. And then also, you notice they're in a tough neighborhood here, right? And you notice they're fighting wars to try and expand their empire. That creeps in on Poland. That could creep in on Russia. Could creep in on Sweden. And so Sweden and Russia will also join in this thing. You guys are going back. Okay, harder to see. Yeah, sorry about that. So, they're going to join up in this thing against Frederick because everybody's nervous about this Prussia that's militarized and expanding their realm. And so Maria Theresa is going to make some friends here. And so, Britain will end up supporting Prussia. Why? Why will Britain support Prussia? Balance of power. I don't know. The Brits, they're interesting characters during this time period. They will always fight for the underdog. It's kind of funny. Right? So the Brits, they're going to end up fighting for the underdog here because they're like, well, wait a second, that'll screw up the balance of power. I like stability. I like symmetry. We can't have this. And so the Brits, they're going to end up fighting over in the New World. So they've got some possessions that they want, and so who are they trying to take them from over here in the New World? Take them from the dirty French, exactly. So they want all of this territory right here. So the British are going to fight in the New World and on the high seas. That means who has to take on all of Europe by himself? Frederick, because the British said, hey, you guys take care of Europe, we'll take care of the New World. Yeah, all right. So, think about it. The 12th largest country in Europe taking on all of the rest. Is this going to be hard?
Yeah.
Yeah, maybe just a bit. Let's see how it goes for them. If we zoom in on Europe here, with this 7 Years' War, there's going to be a 3-power occupation of Berlin. Everybody, France, Austria, and Russia, moved in with their forces on Berlin and surrounded Frederick at one point. Is it looking good for Fred? No! Completely surrounded. They were there at the outskirts of Berlin. He used the last of his regiments that he had available to keep the city held together, but they were laying siege to it, hoping to starve him to death, basically, inside the walls of Berlin. And so he was nervously biting his nails, thinking, oh my God, what was I thinking, taking on all of Europe by myself? And then a beautiful thing happened. A queen in Russia died. Empress Elizabeth died in Russia in 1762, and then her son, Tsar Peter III, will take over. This is not Peter the Great, mind you. This is his grandson. Tsar Peter III will take over, and he was a big fan of Frederick, really liked Frederick a lot, and so he will end up pulling out of Berlin. Wait a second. Is this looking good then for Tsar Peter? I mean, how do you think Russians felt about Tsar Peter as he was winning the war, about to take over Prussia, about to take spoils of war from Prussia, and he decides, yeah, I kind of like the guy. I'm going to leave him alone. And he's a new king. What do you think? People going to like him very much? No, you know who his wife is? Catherine the Great. And she's a German princess, and she wanted to see them take over Prussia, right? So, Catherine the Great had some friends in the military, lovers in the military, okay? So, she had some lovers in the military, some generals, who were ticked. And so she was like, I'm ticked too against my husband whom I'm cheating on. And so what did they do to him? They assassinated him. Yeah. So, they assassinated him because he pulled out of the war too early. Yes.
I have a movie about Catherine.
Really? Yeah, you should. I would love to watch it. Maybe I could steal a clip from it.
Okay.
It'd be awesome. All right, or excuse me, borrow a clip from it. Yeah. All right. So the results though for Frederick, how are things looking for Fred? I mean, Russia pulls out, and at that point, France says, yeah, okay, we're out of money too. We'll pull out as well. And then Austria says, what? How can you do this to me? This was going to be so wonderful. I was going to get my vengeance. Maria Theresa, is she going to get her vengeance? No, she's going to be all crestfallen and say, dang it, now I'm going to have to sign the Treaty of Paris, and I'm going to just be righteously ticked about it because he got what he wanted. And then she's going to go home and weep. All right, so the European War, though, will end in stalemate. So who's looking like a big deal? Frederick, he's looking pretty awesome. They are big time at this point. So Frederick is big time. Meanwhile, Britain, how they looking? Awesome, exactly. So Britain fought in the war in the New World. What did we get out of it? This is American History Review. Lots of land, seemingly endless amounts of land. The French were kicked out of North America. Therefore, Britain looking pretty dang cool at this point. And they've got a navy that's going to rule the seas until World War II. Right now, the problem for Britain, though, of course, is come 1763, we got a whole bunch of ticked-off colonists because Britain wants the colonists to pay for the most expensive war in history. And are they willing to do that? No, they are not. But again, who's looking pretty good in Europe? Prussia. So this war only worked out well for Prussia. I mean, really, long term, not so great for Britain if you think about it. But for Prussia, everything was perfect, even though they kind of lost the war, right? So still, even though they lost, they still won. Does that make sense? Yeah. All right, good. So that's the situation for Prussia. Now we're going to take a look at the historiography of Frederick II, Frederick the Great, because historiography, remember yesterday we were talking about it, how has German history looked at the foundation of Prussian absolutism since the Nazi Third Reich? How have they looked at the German kings? It started it. And what's that process called? What's that term called? In German historiography? It's called the Sonderweg. Let's all say that together. Sonderweg! Looks like Sonderweg, right? And it's Sonderweg. Okay, so the Sonderweg tells us that all of German history that went wrong with the Nazis is all because of those dirty, early Nazi kings, Frederick William I and Frederick the Great. Is that true? Oh, maybe. It's arguable. But I don't see it either. Especially if you really look at Frederick the Great, I can't see how that's possible. And so here we have a video. Woo! We have a video by a British historian who's got heavens. He made an interesting documentary. I gave you just kind of the beginning and the end of this documentary, so it skips around a little. But follow along here. It's a 10-minute video, but it's got great information about Frederick the Great. It will really help out some of you with your debates, and others of you can look for the weaknesses of Frederick's rule, and maybe based on this video. So here you go.
In the spring of 1945, Adolf Hitler retreated to the Führerbunker, 16 meters below the streets of Berlin. The Russian army was closing in on the German capital. World War II was all but over. But even in his last days, Hitler refused to accept defeat. He continued to draw inspiration from the deeds of his hero, a legendary German leader whose portrait was the only image to adorn the walls of Hitler's private shelter. Frederick the Great, the King of Prussia. 200 years earlier, Frederick the Great had transformed Prussia into a formidable military state. In the 19th century, it was this Iron Kingdom that would create for the first time a single unified Germany. And in the 1930s, Hitler fused the glorious history of this old Prussia to his Nazi regime. But this association would be a disaster for Frederick's reputation and for the future of Prussia itself.
Notice the color of the Prussian uniform?
For there was another Prussia
Blue and
and
red paint.
another Frederick. Frederick the Great was also a self-styled philosopher king, an intellectual heavyweight, a talented musician, philosopher, historian, and poet. Frederick's Prussia was a beacon of enlightenment and culture, and his life unfolded as an epic drama of scandal, sacrifice, and glory. So how great was Frederick? And how did this enlightened monarch become an inspiration for the most repellent regime in modern European history? Loyalty alone wasn't enough to win the 7 Years' War, but the patriotic resilience of his army did buy Frederick just enough time to prevail. Ultimately, he was saved by a stroke of luck. In 1762, with Prussia's forces all but spent, Tsarina Elizabeth, ruler of Russia, died. Her passing was celebrated in Berlin as the Miracle of Brandenburg. Her successor, Grand Duke Peter, was an ardent admirer of Frederick. Russia's days in the anti-Prussian coalition were numbered. The 7 Years' War would soon be over, and its end inaugurated 23 years of peaceful Frederiциan rule. In the second half of his reign, diplomacy, realpolitik, and the first partition of Poland would bring Frederick more new territory than he'd gained through war. At home, he worked tirelessly to build the progressive state he had outlined in the Anti-Machiavel, a vision that survives today in the architecture at the very center of Berlin. Frederick had initially intended that this square should be your bog-standard European residential square. That meant at one end there'd be a palace, and then extending from each wing a royal opera house and a royal library. But what Frederick did was something completely radical. He subtracted the palace from this ensemble, and instead you had an opera on one side, a freestanding library opposite, and over in the corner, St. Hedwig's Cathedral. Work on this cathedral began in 1745 after the king got back from the Silesian Wars, and St. Hedwig was the patron saint of Silesia. This was to be a cathedral for the Catholic subjects of a Protestant kingdom. It was one thing to tolerate the existence of a religious minority within the borders of your kingdom. That was not uncommon in 18th century Europe. But to establish a building like this as a projection of tolerance, as a value in its own right, that was a highly distinctive and unusual gesture. In characteristic absolutist fashion, the king intervened personally in every area of state policy: public education, the civil service, law, agriculture, trade and industry.
War ein absoluter Herrscher, das auf alle Fälle. Aber war natürlich genauso aufgeklärt. Und ich denke, gerade Friedrich II. Zeigt, dass beides tatsächlich auch zu machen geht. Zum Beispiel hat die Folter abgeschafft. Hat für religiöse Toleranz propagiert. Hat auch in gewisser Weise die Zensur in Preußen abgeschafft. Und hat tatsächlich reformerische Ideen angeregt und dann auch umgesetzt. Das größte und beste Beispiel ist garantiert die Justizreform.
To equate Hitler with Frederick the Great, Nazi Germany with Prussia, is a ludicrous perversion of history. The idea that one of Europe's most enlightened and gifted monarchs prefigured one of the most repellent dictators in modern history is simply absurd. But during the final stages of World War II, as his downfall became inevitable, Hitler's identification with the Prussian king steadily intensified.
The Minister of Propaganda, Joseph Goebbels, had a very, very big influence. Goebbels used to read the personal papers and the letters of Frederick the Great, so he could say to Hitler, oh, it's exactly your situation. And he reacted exactly like you. And he gave an imagination that Hitler should think, oh, I'm very near to Frederick, and if I'm very near, I will win the war, maybe.
In the 7 Years' War, Frederick had been saved by the death of the Russian Tsarina, the miracle of Brandenburg. And in April 1945, it seemed that history was repeating itself.
Aboard a special train beginning the 24-hour trip back to Washington, the 31st President of the United States leaves Warm Springs forever.
So tight was the grip of this historical romance that the propaganda minister responded with elation and even a sense of triumph when he learned the news of the death of the American president, Franklin Roosevelt, on the 12th of April 1945. And he put a call through to Hitler's apartment and said, "Mein Führer, I congratulate you. Roosevelt is dead. God has not abandoned us." But this was pure fantasy. Within a month of Roosevelt's death, Berlin was finally overrun by the Russians. Germany was defeated. It was the end for the Nazis and for Frederick's Prussia. After the downfall, the reckoning. The Allies identified Prussia as the very source of German militarism, an evil seed that had spawned 2 world wars and inspired Hitler. Their retribution was swift and decisive. On the 25th of February 1947, representatives of the victorious powers, the United States, the United Kingdom, the Soviet Union, and France, met here in one of the few government buildings still standing in war-torn Berlin. Their purpose was to discuss the Prussian problem, and their solution was simple and shocking. Prussia was to be abolished. In that moment, the entire history of a great European state was cast onto the scrap heap.
Oh, beautiful! All right, so Professor Clark certainly disagrees with Hans Rosenberg. We talked about the Sonderweg, right? So, what do you think? According to Professor Clark, why can we not see Frederick the Great as the I guess you could say, the progenitor of Nazism? You guys know what progenitor means? Progenitor. The starting point, right? The starting point. All right, so why can we not see him as the starting point of Nazism? He was all about, I mean, this guy was, an atheist, really. He was an atheist. And yet he builds a Catholic cathedral in the middle of a Protestant empire in order to, and it's named after the patron saint of Silesia, which he's just taken over. So is he treating these people like a bunch of conquered victims? No, he's saying, hey, we're Protestant, but we're cool, man. Come on over. Come and join us, which is weird for the time period to do something like that. Right? Okay, what else shows us that he was not the progenitor of Nazism?
Censorship.
Censorship. So he got rid of censorship. What else did he do? Abolish torture, exactly, which was standard method of trying to solve criminal issues at this time and get confessions. All right, and then in terms of the law books, all right, I didn't show you the part that goes into detail about it, but in terms of the law books, what did he do with the law books? Yeah, he rewrote the entire legal code. And so most monarchs, when they're rewriting the new illegal code, remember, Nathan, you gave us a great quote. You gave me a great quote this morning about Louis XIV. Tell me Louis XIV's quote.
It's legal because I want it to be.
It's legal because I want it to be legal. So when Louis XIV wanted to make something a new law, he just did it. And it always worked out best for whom? The people or the country? For him, yes, it always worked out best for him. Now, Frederick, is that going to be the case with him, do you think? No, he said it's going to be legal because it's best for the state. It's best for the people who embody the state. That's different, very different for the time period. So, pretty cool dude, certainly. And then another guy that we'll see is going to try and do many similar things in terms of rebuilding his state, rebuilding his army, trying to keep the people as happy as possible to some extent, is going to be Peter the Great. Now, Peter the Great, we'll get a little more into whether or not he's an enlightened absolutist later. I would argue he's not, and most historians would argue the same thing. But Peter, he's inherited a pretty rough empire, right? An empire that is certainly backward, completely backward. One of the common recurring themes that we're going to see throughout European history is how Russia is always backward. And they're always trying to catch up, right? So they're always trying to catch up to everybody else. And is it easy to do? No. And so right when they think they're caught up, oh, they lose another war. Holy crap. Now we got to catch up again because we're like 100 years behind everyone. And then, oh, yeah, we caught up. And then, oh, no, there's another war. And, oh, no, our empire has failed again. So they got to always catch up. So Peter the Great, though, he's going to be the start of this thing. And I got to say, love the guy, right? I'm not ashamed to admit it. Got a little bit of a historical man crush on him, right? Because he did so much cool stuff, right? So many cool stuff. So we get a quote here from your Robert K. Massey packet. How many of you have read the entirety of Robert K. Massey, Peter the Great? Wait, is that when he goes to... So Peter in Holland is the first one, and then Commerce by Decree is the second one. Yeah? All right, so Commerce by Decree, at the end of that, we get a quote about how the people of Russia, under the leadership of Peter the Great, they strained, they struggled, they cursed, but what? They obeyed. Okay, so he's going to work really hard, assiduously, in fact, to try and get his nation caught up to the rest of Europe. And in the process, people, it's going to be a rough time, but they will always obey, right? Now, Maddie, you're noticing already.
Yeah.
See the quote up there, right? So the class of 2009 adopted that for their t-shirt quote. The students obeyed Peter, strained, they struggled, they opposed, they cursed. But what? Historical man. Right up there at the top screens, to the left of my Korean flag, you see it? Yeah? Class of 2009? Man, they were ticked when I was making them write in-class essays. Man, they fought me on every little detail, but in the end, their pass percentage, 86%. Okay, so I knew what I was doing, apparently. All right, so that brings us to the Empire of the Czar. All right, so the Empire of the Czar, what do you notice about it?
Huge.
It's friggin' huge, right. Okay, yeah, so what is it, like 12 time zones? Is that, or is it 8? I can't remember. Anyone remember? Is it 8? I think it's 8. Okay, so 8 time zones. This thing is huge. It's like twice the size of America. So you think America's big. It's like right here. Boom! Huge. So, the Russian Empire is massive when Peter is going to inherit this thing. What else do you notice about this empire? Is it a European empire? Okay, so the funny thing about Russia is it's anchored in Europe. I mean, continentally speaking, with the geographic plates, they're in Europe right here with the western part of Russia, but the rest is in Asia. So it's an Asian empire anchored in Europe, so to speak. It's a very strange conglomerate. And so is it going to be difficult to manage the hundreds, literally hundreds of different cultures and ethnicities and language groups within this empire?
Yeah.
How do you do it? I mean, seriously, if you're Peter, without modern communication systems, sitting here in Moscow, how would you do it? Did previous monarchs, were they able to do it? Previous czars? No. All right, so let's take a look at the empire that he's going to inherit here. So this is the Empire of the Tsar, just kind of general stuff leading us up to Peter the Great here. The Russian Empire is this unique blend of East and West that we were just talking about. They have a very strong autocracy. Why? Why do they have a very strong autocracy? Why do you have to have a strong autocracy if you are a Russian leader at this time?
This is so big.
It's, yeah, exactly. It is so big that if you're not an iron-fisted dictator, good luck holding this thing together, right? So it all begins with Ivan IV the Terrible, right? Anyone know why they called him Ivan the Terrible? He was really mean, yeah. So he was a big fan of torture, right? Torture is fun for Ivan the Terrible. So, I mean, if someone, if they're trying to get something out of somebody or trying to punish a criminal, they'd usually use what was called the Iron Maiden, right? You guys ever heard of the Iron Maiden? What is it, Forrest? I know you know.
Yeah, all the bands go too. But
Yeah.
it's just like a giant thing that a lot of times is in the shape of a maiden. It's like a big standing coffin. There's like spikes in it.
Yeah. Exactly. So sometimes it would be spring-loaded so that they'd put you in there, they'd, unleash the lever and then just kill you. Sometimes they would have smaller versions that were face masks, right? And they would do it slowly. So you'd have this face mask that they would slowly push on you, and you'd be like, I'll say anything! I'll say anything! And then you confess and they go, thank you, and then close it. Yeah. So Ivan the Terrible, good guy, sort of. No. All right, so he is going to help establish which royal family, though. What will be the royal ruling family of Russia all the way until 1918? Excuse me. Yeah, 1918. Yes. Who's it? Not the Bolsheviks. They're coming in 1918. The Romanovs! Yes, the Romanov family. All right, you're thinking of the Bolshevik Revolution. That's all right. Yeah, it's it's Friday. That's okay. So the Tsar, he has complete ownership of everything. Everything, okay? Complete ownership of the land and its serfs. So serfdom is massive. I mean, I think it's like 90 to 95% of the Russian people are serfs. Think about that. 90 to 95% are serfs, slaves essentially, right? Okay, is that going to be good for your system? If you've got maybe 5 to 10% on a good day that are boyars, nobles. No, because, and are they interested in doing industry or development of the economy? No, they think it's below them. Instead, they just want to own serfs and wear their furs and grow their beards really huge. All right, so the state and church are totally unified at this time. They are Eastern Orthodox, right? And so you don't want to mess with the state at all. You don't want to update things because otherwise the church gets absolutely ticked about it too. All right, and then another thing about the church too. If they are linked with the state, are you able to tax the Orthodox Church, which is a big landowner? No. So you cannot tax their wealth, cannot tax their land. So culturally, politically, economically, and technologically, they are completely backward by the 17th century. Basically, Russia, by the time that Peter inherits the throne in the 1680s, is about 200 years behind the rest of Europe. Okay, so think about that. If you were militarily 200 years behind the rest of Europe, are you going to be doing very well in war? Culturally, politically, economically, if you're that far behind everybody else in Europe, is there much you can do? No. So everybody's going to make fun of the Russians. Again, many of them said, oh, those Muscovites, they're ruled by bears, right? And they look like it too. Because when they would go on diplomatic meetings, you'd see this Russian with this huge beard, huge poofy hat, and then a huge skin coat as well, or fur coat, excuse me. And then frequently the women, when the women would come, they would wear these massive dresses that had all kinds of saintly bling on them, right? So all kinds of icons and bells. So you could hear the Russian diplomats coming from miles away because they're like, ting, 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 ting. The women look like that. And the men are like, like they were early bears. So that's the Russian Empire that Peter gets to inherit. And is that what he wants to keep? No. We'll pick up on that one.